Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Yeah, here we go. Your dial set correctly, too. USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. We can take calls today. I've got the call screen up and running. Telephone number, if you'd like to call in, 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm just trying to keep up with the elite, and it's really difficult because I'm I'm looking at the electric bill that Harry and Meghan have in their new home in California in the United States of America. And let's see. So I have to multiply this, class. So think about this. This is in pounds sterling. This is their electric bill. Now multiply it times 1.3, or actually 1.31, or add 31% more to this, okay? So their electric bill is 23,400 pounds. Guineith, that's a year. Do you think you'd ever have an electric bill that high? 23,400 pounds.
What, per month?
Per year.
Is that what they're paying per month?
No, per year.
Oh my gosh.
23,000.
Even so, that's a huge electric bill for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's probably $40,000-$40,000.
It's 30,000. It's 30,600.
30,600 US dollars. That's a huge electric bill. That's always unimaginably large. What do they, when you think of it this way, how much do you really need to live? If you're sitting at home, okay, and it's dark outside, and you want to read a book, you turn the light on. So it's one light bulb. Like, how much do you really need to live? You know what I mean? This is how you and I think. I mean, I haven't had an electric bill in years, in over 7 years, because I've lived off grid for all that time. But I'm sure that the electricity prices haven't gone up that much. It's just
right.
Like I say, it's always unimaginably large. Even if I had as much money as they did, I think that I would, if I wanted to turn the lights on at night to read a book, then I would turn the lights on in the room where I was, and I'd leave the lights off in all the other rooms, maybe.
Yeah, right, and that's what we do. Me. Well, and if you have, class, if you have a solar system, there's no infinite supply of electricity. Whether you can afford it or not, if you have a system of a fixed size, you're dependent on the sun, and if you waste electricity, you're going to be in the dark. It's as simple as that. Well, they have a grid-connected system, and they can just, say more, send more, just keep, doing whatever they want. But that's the electric bill. Now, how about the water bill? Now, I thought about how much we use in terms of dollars per year in water. Now, we pump our own water out of our own well. So I figure it's about $10 a month if we paid for electricity. So $120 a year for water. Now that's for a farm. Now let's put this in perspective, class. So we have, all the typical things that you might find in a house, that use water. But we also have, a cattle waterer. And the cows just drink at will. So when it's dry, or in the winter when they can't get to the ponds or the stream's not running, they'll go to this cattle waterer and they'll drink out of it. And it's powered by electricity, a well, and a cow will drink about 30 gallons of water a day. So if you have 100 cows, that's 3,000 gallons of water a day. So we do what a typical house might do, except maybe we're a little more conservative in not wasting water. We have high efficiency shower heads so that they don't spray a lot of water. They probably use half as much as a typical shower head, at the most, half as much. But the cows drink a lot of water when they drink from the well. So I'm thinking $10 a month for the farm. That's with the cows. So it'd be much less than that if we didn't have the cows. Well, Harry and Meghan spend, in dollars, about $16,500 a year in water. Can you imagine that, Guineith?
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. What do they put all that water on?
Well, they have a
perfectly honest.
They have a pool.
How many swimming pools do they really need to see?
Well, they have a pool, and I'm pretty sure they have like a hot tub. But $16,500 in water. Now, the reason I mention this, Guineith, is we want to talk about the minimalist type lifestyle. What do you really need? Yeah. Now, okay, so those are just two items. Okay. Now, one thing that they have is pretty interesting. They spend 4,200 pounds on pest control.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's $5,500 a year to, get rid of the bugs. That's enormous. That they spend the amount that probably a person might spend on a mortgage. Now, when we bought our first house, Mrs. Finelli and I bought our first house, that was about our annual mortgage payment, roughly $5,000 a year, roughly. And this was for a 4-bedroom brick house. And it was built in 1945, and it was magnificent. It needed some work, and we cleaned it up, fixed it up. But it was big. It was a big house, and it had a fenced-in backyard, and it was in the suburbs. It was really, really nice. And the mortgage payment would be about $5,000 a year. And that was in 1979. Yeah. So these guys spend about that much on getting rid of bugs. They have a gas bill. Now, this would be like for natural gas. Just calculating this out. Let's see. Times 1.31, converted to dollars. $28,000 a year for gas. Now, that would be for heating, probably to keep the pool at a nice 85 degrees. That is, so what I'm talking about, $28,000 a year for gas. That's not for the car. $28,000 a year. Oh my God. That's not for the car. That's just for the house, and now, yeah. These numbers are staggering. Now, why would we be talking about this? Well, and they want to be independent. So Harry and Meghan say, we're doing this on our own. Well, actually, that's nonsense. They're not, because they get money from Prince Charles, his duchy. That's what it's called, duchy. Duchy really means property that he levies taxes on. He collects the taxes, and then he gets to keep the money. It's a pretty nice gig if you could get it, right? So he gives money to Harry so he can afford his gas bill, his water bill, his pest control bill, and his electricity. And mortgage payment. Now, they have a nanny They have a chief of staff. They have some personal assistants. They have a chef. They have 4 housekeepers. 4 housekeepers and a butler. A butler. I'm not sure why they need one of these on 5 acres. Why do you need a butler? And a chief of staff?
Really?
Can you imagine that?
5 acres is nothing.
Yeah.
It's literally the paddock down the front of my place.
Right.
And this paddock down the front, this field down the front, cost them how many hundreds of thousands of dollars in total? $200,000-$300,000 in total to maintain this postage stamp of land. You know, to the class, 5 acres of land probably sounds like a lot of land. But when you are living out in the countryside, you realize that it really is nothing to have a 5-acre farm. You know, it seems big when you're on it, but then you look at the guy next door who's on 20 acres and the other guy who's on 50 acres and him across the road who's on 100 acres, and you realize that your 5 acres of land really is a tiny little postage stamp of land. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Absolutely. So I just calculated out their property taxes. This is for 1 year. For 5 acres. $147,000 a year, property taxes. Now, what could you do with $147,000, class? Well, you could almost buy the farm across the road from us. Now, it's 80 acres. You could almost buy that. You'd need maybe another $20,000. And you'd be able to buy the farm and pay cash for it across the road from us. 80 acres. So what we're talking about is how easy or how hard you have it depends on the bed in which you are born. So if you're born in a royal bed, life's a lot easier. If you're born into a royal family, life's a lot easier. If you are born, with the last name of Bush, Windsor, and some other names, the political dynasties, it's a lot easier. If you want to be president, they say, in grammar school, they told us, we could be president. Oh, it's nonsense. We couldn't be president. You have to be born in the right family, the right political family. You're not going to be president. Heck, I can't even be elected to the board of directors because I wasn't born in the right family of a utility company, which is nothing. So the bottom line is there are the haves and the have almost nothings, which would be us. So the answer is, if you want to survive, you got to figure out the plan, and the plan is really simple. You got to get a farm. You have to get a farm, and then you could, if you had a water bill, you could deduct it. If you had an electric bill, you could deduct it. If you had a gas bill, you could deduct it. And if you had pest control supplies, you could deduct them too. That's why you need a farm. There's no other way out that I can think of to survive. Guineith Isaacs is with us. Guineith, you live on a farm. You raise farm animals. Maybe you could sell some of it. What if, what could you do with $60,000 a year? Would that be nice to have?
Oh, yeah. If I had $60,000, I would approach the people next door and I would ask if I could buy their 40 acres of land.
Huh?
And they'd probably sell it to me.
Well,
they'd probably think that they're doing quite well. Yeah.
Okay.
So
that wouldn't be just a one. Yeah, I'm not talking about $60,000 just once. I'm talking about every year. Okay, $60,000. I don't think the average farmer makes $60,000 a year.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing?
Sorry?
But that's Yeah. The average farmer, I don't believe, makes $60,000 a year. And that's working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So why did I come up with that number? That is the number to keep the pool and the garden kept up for Harry and Meghan. $60,000.
Wow.
A year. No?
This is just 5 acres that they have.
Yeah. 5 acres. 5 acres.
Wow.
So there are people, when you look at these pictures and you see how they're living, and I just wanted to put it in perspective how much money these people waste. And it's stolen money. Prince Charles, at the muzzle of a gun, steals that money from the people who he claims are living on his land. Yeah. Taxes. Real estate taxes. That's what the duchy is. So he takes that money and, dispenses it as he sees he should. Carefully doling out money to Harry and Meghan so they can have a $60,000 amount for the pool and the garden upkeep. It's ridiculous. They even have a nanny. What does Meghan need a nanny for? So how much does a nanny cost? $102,000. A nanny, they're paying $102,000 a year for a nanny. It's staggering to me. And the nanny makes the least amount. The chef makes way more than that. The chief of staff makes double what the nanny makes. Okay, so let's get back to reality. We didn't win the lottery, so we're doing it the hard way, the primitive way, literally. I was talking with Bert Bertonis yesterday, and we were talking about, a bunch of things like the fires in California. He's in California, near the fires. And what's important, and the supply chain, and what if we have the next coronal mass ejection? The next Carrington event. What does it mean? Well, it means the grid goes down, right? And for us, and I was explaining to Bert about the cows and how they drink 30 gallons of water a day, and how if we don't have 30 gallons of water, within 12 hours, we're going to see dead animals. They got to have it. They're black. They attract the sun. We have black Angus cows. They attract the sun, and they get hot. And if they can't get cool, they're going to die. So we are, let's say, maybe 24 hours away from losing our herd all the time. When I say losing, I mean death. So we have to have water. So I mentioned to him what we do about that. So we have a spare well. We have ponds. We have a stream. And the ponds are a runoff. What that means is when it rains, the water runs downhill and shows up at a pond. And the pond holds it until there's too much rain, then the pond has spillways, and the excess goes off to the side and then runs downhill. Well, in times of drought, we need, for us, even without the drought, we need water to live. So a well is really important, and a well pump is really important. And if that thing quits, now what? Am I going to call a guy and say, hey, listen, our well pump quit. Can you come on over? And what if he says, yeah, I can be there. Let's see, today is Wednesday. I can be there next Thursday. How's that? The animals will be dead. We might be dead. 3 days without water, you know that. We'll be right back. Guineith's with us. She's live in Australia. Guineith lives on a farm. And she is in charge of the farm. She is the plumber. She is the electrician. She is the roofer. She is the framer. She is the gardener. She's the horse trainer. Okay. And she's the laborer. She's the engineer. She is the CEO. She's all of it. And, Guineith, just, we were talking about some of the small numbers like electricity and water and gas and pest control for Harry and Meghan. Let's talk about something big. Let's talk about the security team. Now, this is 5.4 acres, right? They have 6 ex-military or former police officers. Okay? The cost to just keep them showing up for work is just over $1 million a year. Let's keep everybody safe. So when you think about it, they chose to live there. Nobody said, nobody put a gun to their head and said, you are going to live here. And it's really dangerous to live in this part of California. I'm kidding, of course. And so just the expense is just unbelievable. But getting back to us, reality, when we put in our well 15 years ago, we got a well, hole in the ground, we got well casing, we got, well pipe. We brought water to the house. It's an underground well pump. It's a submersible pump. It's 1 horsepower. And we have a well pressure tank. And that all cost us 1/3 the amount that Harry and Meghan spend on just paying for water being delivered to their house. So we spent about $5,000 for the well and pump and all the rest of it. Harry and Meghan are going to spend $16,000 a year for their water bill with no well. So if you decide that you want to survive for the long run and be prepared, you're going to need a well. Or you're going to need some source of water. You can catch it from the roof. You can filter it, but you're probably still going to need to pump it somewhere. So you're going to need some electricity, and you're going to need some a pump, and you're going to need some wiring and so forth. And Guineith, how do you do this? Because we're now talking about primitive living, minimalist living. What is it going to take? Because I described how without water, we're all going to die. 3 days. 3 days we'll be dead without water. Everybody. Nobody special, not even Harry and Meghan. And they don't know. They don't know that they are at the mercy of the water company. They haven't figured that out yet. So let's talk about how do you get water, Guineith?
Okay. I have 2 water supplies on this property. One of them is the domestic water supply, and that is fed from a roof catchment, which is piped into some large tanks. It has a total of about 40,000 litres capacity in total. At the moment, we've had rather a dry winter, and they're about 3/4 full. Okay? But that's okay, because it's still, 30,000 litres or thereabouts. And we would use around about 1,000 litres of water a week. And about once a week I go out and I turn on a pump, which pumps the water from one of these cisterns, one of these big water tanks, to an IBC cube, which stands for a food grade IBC cube. I think it originally had something like glucose in it or something like that. But it stands on top of I think it's about 6 meters tall steel rod tower, which is specially made for the purpose. You can buy them from farm supply stores here in Australia, and they are called header towers. But what they are, they're gravity pressure towers. Okay, and you put an IBC cube of 1,000 litres, that's 250 gallons, in the cage. I'm sure we're all familiar with what they look like, on top of the tower, and the house water supply is plumbed into the outlet of that IBC cube. And it has a filter, a small filter. It just captures the, any algae, more or less, that builds up so that the algae doesn't clog up the pipes in the house. And then we turn the taps on and the water comes out of the taps in the house. And that's how we have running water in the house. And we have running water in the kitchen and we have running water in the bathroom. And those are the only 2 rooms with running water. So, I don't know how, if some people have running water in every room, but we don't in our house. That's the domestic water supply. And then I have what I call the agricultural water supply, which is basically a dam, which is what we in Australia call a farm pond. And its catchment area is basically the entire upper half of the farm. And when we get a certain amount of rain, the water flows into this farm pond or dam, and then it's pumped into an IBC cube, which sits on top of the dam wall, and it is pumped to wherever I need to have water on the farm, which is generally on the lower half of the farm, and the upper half of the farm doesn't have any, irrigation on it. It's basically one big, huge field or paddock, which is, field or paddock is kind of a misleading term because the whole farm is actually a forest. So, but it's a eucalyptus forest, and it's a very open canopy, so you've got grass underneath the trees. And, you've got natural vegetation underneath the trees. And that's how it is. And, so that's how our water system operates. And I've been here for 7 years now, and there's only been one occasion where we've had to buy in water. And that was end of 2015. We had to buy in water because the dam was in danger of going dry. We'd had one of the driest years we've ever had. And, but the year rolled into 2016 and we ended up having floods. And it went from within a matter of weeks from the dam being absolutely empty and bone dry almost, except for the water that I'd brought in, to overflowing. And it kept overflowing for around about 6 months. But after that experience, I decided that I was going to work on the catchment area above the dam, and we haven't run out of water since. And I think that we've had a drier year this year than what we had in 2015, and even so, the dam is still about half full. So I'm quite happy about that. So does that make sense? But this is how farmers operate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, class. So if we contrast this with Harry and Meghan, they've got the same system, except they don't own it. What happens is water comes from somewhere. Let's say it comes from a river. Let's say it comes from a large stream. Let's say it comes from underground in a well, like Springfield, Missouri has a well, 600 feet down. And what happens is the water is pumped. Let's say it comes from a river. Water is a freshwater river. Water is pumped from the river up into one of those water towers. You've seen them all over the place. So they've got this tower, and on top there's a tank. And the idea is the water's pumped to the top of the tank, and then gravity pulls the water down through the municipal plumbing system, ultimately to the house, in the suburbs or the city. So the water tower is the highest point. It's higher than any of the houses. So gravity will pull the water from the tank to the homes. And as the water's consumed, there's a switch that says, okay, turn on the pumps. We need more water for the tank. Well, that's exactly what Guineith has, except she pumps her tank, which is on the header tower, manually. She just decides when she wants to power that up. Now, the difference is Guineith owns the pump, the plumbing, the tank, and the tower. Harry and Meghan don't own any of that. They're reliant on other people, to maintain the pump and the tank and the rest of it. Well, Guineith knows whether she should consume less water or not based on the supply of water that she can see. And if she wants to waste water, she's certainly welcome to do that. But then it's, how is she going to survive after that? Because if you've ever tried to carry a bucket of water, like a 5-gallon bucket of water, Let's say you start out with 5 gallons and you start carrying it, let's say 300 feet. You're going to be a little bit worn out by the time you've gotten to that 300 feet. And you won't have 5 gallons in the bucket anymore because it's going to slosh out. You might have maybe 4 gallons if you're careful. So you've wasted 20% of it, unless you have a lid. But does everybody have a lid for those 5-gallon buckets? And if you want to live on 5 gallons a day, it's going to be really, really, really tough. Because an older model toilet would use more than half of that bucket with one flush. No kidding. So the bottom line is water is number one. You have to have water for life to exist. And are you willing to be dependent on someone else to provide your water? Well, it's always worked fine. You know, the city's always had water. Sometimes they say don't drink the water because they messed up and it got polluted, got cross-connected with a sewer system, or there was a chemical spill or something like that. But you really don't know what's in your water. You really don't. There are places in West Virginia that have municipal water supplies that have been selling toxic, chemical-laden water to their customers. And then years later, after people have died from cancers of all kinds, they say, you know what, you're right. We shouldn't have done that. We'll try to do better next time. That's what happens. So why not buy a farm, get out of Dodge, and be in control of your own destiny, and have a water filtration system that will, carbon block final filter system that will remove just about all the chemical poisons that could be in your water if they happen to show up. Because it kind of looks like things are getting worse to me. The shooting has started. It's the police against the villagers. It's the corporations against the villagers. It's Black Lives Matter against the villagers. It's like a free-for-all. So why would you want to hang around? We knew this was coming. Mrs. Finelli and I and the family knew this was coming. And that's why we moved to Missouri. Now, I'm not saying Missouri is the only destination. It's just one. There are plenty of places you can go that are a lot safer. Guineith moved to the country in Australia. She knew this was coming too. We'll be right back. So, class, if you have a farm and you have, an orchard and you have a drought, you're going to have to provide water to the trees. That's what we're doing here. And I've taken 5-gallon buckets and drilled tiny holes, one hole in each bucket about the diameter of a number 2 pencil lead. I fill it with 5 gallons of water. I've got 13 or so buckets on the trees, and I rotate them, about 40 trees or so, something like that. And I move these buckets. I give them like 3 drinks a day, and then I move the buckets. So 15 gallons of water per tree per day. And it takes me a couple hours, literally, to fill those buckets and, move from bucket to bucket to bucket to bucket. And it literally takes a couple hours a day to do that during the drought. I have to develop a better system. Now, I didn't used to have to do that, but now I do. So, you are responsible. So if you don't want the orchard, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about the trees. They'll die. So with the well, since that's the number one thing that, other than your housing that you've got to have, you ought to consider getting a few of these spare items. A well pump, spare well pump, exactly like the one you have. Find out which one you have. There's typically a label on the well pressure tank that says this is the well pump. So get the same one if you like it. Then get the same spare well control box. And that's inside too. If you have a submersible pump, that's inside somewhere. Maybe a few lengths of well pipe, same kind that you've got. Pipe couplings to put the pipe together in case one breaks. And pipe thread compound to put the pipes together. Then some stainless steel clamps, depending on the kind of well pipe you have, whether you have black poly or whether you have PVC, Schedule 80. Pressure tank, a spare pressure tank, the bigger the better. And a spare pressure relay to turn the well pump on and off. Those are things you ought to consider getting, and you can get them now while they're affordable and while there's somewhat of a supply of them. I suggest you consider doing all those things because if you don't have any water, you're dead. Any comments, Guineith?
Yeah, I have a saying around here, which is nothing else happens without the water. And when I was explaining to my son how important it was for me to do this catchment management work at the top of the block, the top 10 acres of the block, and which basically involves putting a bunch of trenches in on contour and along drainage lines so that the water, instead of flowing off the block, it gathers in the trenches and soaks into the soil. And that means that, the water goes into the groundwater. We have a very shallow, bedrock here on this land. The bedrock is usually less than 3 feet deep, and it's granite, continental bedrock. So there's really not much of a place for the water to go, and it really wouldn't be any good trying to dig a well. Okay, because once you get to continental bedrock, that's what the water tends to sit on in the water table. And so because we've got a very shallow, continental bedrock here, the water might flow down through cracks in it, the trees put their roots down and they crack the bedrock open and they create small reservoirs of water, but, you wouldn't be able to put a well down there and expect any inflow into the well. So you've got to think of the geology of your land. So that's why we've got this thing of this dam, and also we've got other dams on the lower part of the block, but the main dam is the one that collects most of the water. You've got to think of these things, and you've got to actually, it's a really good idea if you get a map of your farm, either from the municipality or from Google Earth or wherever, Google Maps or wherever, and plot out the facilities that are on your land. And you can get a satellite photo of your own land from Google Maps. Just type in your address onto Google Maps, and it will bring up a satellite image of your land with all the property boundaries marked, which is very, very convenient. They didn't have that back in the day, but they had it, when I was deciding what I wanted to do with this land, and I made use of that, and I sort of decided more or less what I was going to do with what part of the land back about 7 years ago. And I've been gradually accomplishing that plan ever since. It has changed somewhat since I've decided, maybe this is not suitable for this part of the land after all, or maybe I'll go and do that with this other part of the land. But more or less it stayed on the same track, and you've really got to do that, and you've got to really be committed to going out and doing a little bit on your land each day. Whether that land is 1 acre or 5 acres or 20 acres or 100 acres, you've got to go out and do a little bit of work on your land each day. And if you do, then you'll find that you can actually accomplish a lot. Yep. Does that make sense, Vincent?
That's what it's like on the farm. That's what it's like. We're talking about minimalist living, primitive living. Guineith and I will be right back after top of the hour news and commercial announcements. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Guineith Isaacs is with us. Top of the hour news talked about Hurricane Laura. And I've seen numbers, mandatory evacuation for 385,000 people. I've seen 500,000. Those are pretty big. Those are pretty big numbers. And let's just take a minute to talk about this, because we're talking about minimalist living, primitive living. So Hurricane Laura has intensified to a Category 3 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's going to make landfall early tomorrow. And it will hit Texas and Louisiana coast. There will be life-threatening storm surges, damaging winds, and the storm surges could go as far inland as 30 miles. 30 miles. That's incredible. So think about this. Who's at risk? Well, people who live in areas that are low-lying, people who live on the coasts. Water runs downhill. Will there be cross-connecting of the drinking water supply with the sewage system? Yeah. Will there be chemical spills? Yeah. Will there be trucks and buses and cars and homes destroyed? Yep. So if you know these things, why would you want to live there? You don't have to live there, right? Is it because of the job? That's what happens. Most people live where their family is, and they don't leave because the family's there. And, the first member of the family came, then the second, and then the third, and then they'd stay there. But maybe the first family made a mistake and didn't land on such a good spot. Maybe it's time to move. Other people, when I graduated college, and I looked for a job, and, some jobs were far away. Well, that's no fun moving. The family's not there. Don't know anybody there. Don't want to go there, right? Isn't that what most people think? Well, what our family did was we decided where we wanted to live. Where is it best for us? Regardless of what previous members of our family decided they were going to live. So we went to where we wanted to live. And about the job, we made our own way. I don't have a boss. I tell myself what to do. That's what Guineith does. She doesn't have a boss. She makes her own way. We make our own way. And yet, can you do it? Yeah, you can do it. Is it fun? Well, maybe it's a little terrifying initially, but eventually, it's the best thing you could possibly do. Guineith, any comments?
I wouldn't live in town again for anything.
Yeah.
I love it out here. It's so beautiful, especially, just at every season, it's beautiful. In the spring or in the autumn, the mist just sort of settles on the forest, and it's almost ethereal. And then, winter comes and, you get the rain and it just falls. And the smell of fresh rain in a eucalyptus forest really has to be experienced for you to realize what a beautiful feeling that is. And then the summertime comes around, and I don't really like the summer because everything dies. And, you've got the eucalyptus forest just turns into the classic Australian bush. And, it just dries out, and then you get the crickets start. And the crickets in the Australian bush have to be heard to be believed. It can be almost deafening sometimes. And the heat and the sun and, but it's not too hot because you've still got the eucalyptus trees there and they shelter you. And it can be terrifying sometimes because there have been a few occasions where you've had forest fires nearby, like within a few kilometres. And, you've been able to smell the smoke and you've been able to see the smoke blowing across, and then you go online and you go to the fire authorities website and you see where the fires are. So it really is a whole lifestyle, but all up, even with the bushfires, even with the drought, even with all the rest of it, I really wouldn't live anywhere else on the earth other than where I live. And I live here because I choose to live here. And I take a great deal of pleasure in looking after my land, and I trust that God will look after me, that he knows about me on my little 20-acre farm, and that he's not going to let any of these things overcome me. Or, if I have to go through something, then he'll be there with me. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be in the place where God has put you. Because, many years ago when I was deciding what I should do, I saw this farm on the internet. And just before that, I prayed God, I really would like to go on a farm again. You know, at the time I was living in a caravan park, which is what they call a trailer park here in Australia, with my boys. I knew I couldn't keep living there forever. I knew that it was a dead end, and I had a house where I'd come from, and I decided I was going to sell it and do something, but I didn't know what. And I saw this farm on the internet, on a real estate website, and, you know, it was just like I saw the place and I knew that this was the place for me, so I rang up the agent. I went to see it the next day and I signed the contract on the spot. And within, within just a few weeks we'd moved in. And, yeah, within like 2 months after that it had settled. And it was my farm and I owned it outright. But you see, there was planning before that went into that because I sold my house in the suburbs to buy this farm. And maybe that's the thing that a lot of people might consider doing. Well, they can. I would never ever move back to the suburbs now. You know, it would be disastrous. And, you know it would be disastrous. I would never really sell this place, because I love this place, and, you know, it's become home to me now. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Okay, so if you live in the suburbs, Guineith, you or anyone else, you are chained to the utilities. You are chained to electricity. You are chained to natural gas, if you have it. You are chained to the water supply. Whereas if you want gas, you go buy it, put it in a tank. Meaning propane. If we want it, we do the same thing. Now, you make a lot of decisions, and you are really in tune with what's happening. And that's what makes USA Prepares different from other broadcasts. We actually do it, whereas other broadcasters talk about it. We live this lifestyle. We know that if it's not sunny, we're not going to have much electricity because we generate our own. We know that if the well pump breaks, we got to fix it like right now. There's nothing more important than that right now other than breathing. We know that. We know that if the roof shingles start to flop off, if we don't put some back there, it's like a cancer. One flops off, then the next, and the next. Pretty soon you've got water coming through the roof. We know that. We know that if the fence has a break in it, and if we don't fix it right away, it's a lot harder to get the cows back in, then fix the fence, than it is to fix the fence right away. We know that. We know that if there's a little hole in the driveway, it's going to become a big hole, and pretty soon you won't be able to drive down the driveway, so you fix it when it's little. We know these things because we're in tune with the land. We look at the leaves and we say, boy, that is struggling. We're going to do something about it, we're just going to let it die. We have our gardens so that we can eat. And, you know, it's really rewarding, class, to go out in the garden and pick some tomatoes and peppers and make a salad. It's unbelievable. Fresh. And you're not going to find food like that in the supermarket, because the food in the supermarket is raised in a factory or a factory farm where all the tomatoes are the same size. And you don't even know. You don't know if human waste is used for fertilizer. You don't know if chemical applications have been made to make everything look good. And what happens when you go to a restaurant and they serve you a meal? They say, how's it taste? But the first thing before you taste it is, how's it look? Well, it's engineered to taste good. Well, if you raise your own food from a garden, it will taste good by nature. And you'll learn how to do it. And you won't be dependent on the system. I hate the system. I mean, I really do. I don't like calling and having other people have to do things for me. I just don't like it. Number one, they don't know what they're doing. Number two, they overcharge me. And those are two reasons. So they're incompetent and they overcharge. And I don't like it. So we do everything we can ourselves. Everything. I even ask people, do you do your own taxes? And I got to tell you, very few people even do their own taxes. Why? Because they don't know how. How is that possible? How is it possible that we have a government that that makes rules that we don't understand, and we have to hire somebody to interpret the rules and then tell us how much we owe the government. It's unbelievable. There are a lot of stupid people out there, and that's one more reason to get away from them. They really are dumb. They can't prepare their own taxes. They're afraid of being audited. I think being audited is fun. I mean, it's kind of sick, right? But I think it's fun. It's a challenge. It's warfare. We're just, one against one. And I know the rules. So I know how to play the game. And that's what you need to do, class. You need to learn the rules. It's hard at first. But then you look around and you say, boy, how come everybody doesn't know how to do this? How come? But they don't. And you've got Guineith. She's a mom. She's a widow. Her husband died, and she had to make it go. She had to make it go. And does. And if you are determined, you can too. I know you can. But I also have to tell you that after 10 years of teaching people how to do this, virtually no one has taken our advice. It's hard to believe, but it's true. Virtually no one has taken our advice. Well, here we are. We're close to the end of the road. Society is unraveling. There's rioting, protests all over the globe. The cities are fraying. And it's dangerous to be in a city. And who in their right mind would want to be there? New York is a ghost town. Manhattan's a ghost town right now. So we've been talking about primitive living, and we've been talking about why you should consider it. It's not too late. It's really late in the game, but it's not too late. You still can do it. And there's still buyers for some properties. But it looks like people are leaving the cities. And I don't blame them. I mean, we figured this out decades ago. That's not a good place to be. So the idea is really simple, class. It's simple. Population density. Make sure you're in a low population dense area where there are not a lot of people. That means that there won't be a lot of cell towers. There won't be a lot of infrastructure. There won't be sidewalks and street lights and so forth. Okay. And when you don't have street lights, you don't pay for that. If you don't have sidewalks, you don't pay for that. If you don't have trash pickup, you don't pay for that. If you don't have police, you don't pay for that. If you don't have an incorporated town, you don't have a mayor and the staff, and you don't pay for that, and heat for the building and insurance for the building and all the, things that they require, pensions and so forth. You don't pay for that. So if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of amenities, you won't have to pay for it. And you won't have to pay like Harry and Meghan, a ridiculous amount of tax. 1% of the cost of the purchase of the property they pay in real estate taxes per year, which is nuts.
Wow.
You can buy a farm in Missouri and have Oh yeah. You can buy a farm in Missouri and pay $100 a year or less in taxes, depending on the improvements that you put on it. So if you put a, expensive house on it, you're going to spend more in taxes. But if you have a modest house, you can get by with $100 or $200 in annual real estate taxes on an 80-acre farm. No kidding. Guineith, your thoughts about this minimalist or primitive type of living that can be done? Yeah.
I want to mention there might be people out there in the class who are thinking, well, I'm on unemployment benefits or I'm on a really, really low wage, and how can I afford farmland? And I would like to offer a suggestion. There are companies out there that do rent to buy or, vendor finance programs for purchasing rural land. And some of these companies, some of the land's really, really nice, really good land in fertile areas, even in places like Missouri, Minnesota, Montana, I've probably said it wrong, Montana. But also in places like Arizona and New Mexico and places like that as well, out in the middle of the desert, because it's not all out in the middle of the desert. And many of these companies, you can put $100 or $250 down as a deposit on a piece of land, and you can pay it back at like $300 or $400 a month. And you would be paying that in rent anyway, easily. In fact, that's probably a really, really low rental payment. But you can pay that money out, that $300 or $400 a month, and you can have the farm paid for within just a few years. And granted, you're going to get to that farm, and if you even have a shed on the farm, you're going to be really, really lucky. And probably you'll have to move a trailer onto the farm or a tent or something like that onto the land initially, to begin developing it. And there's going to be nothing there. There's going to be no water supply. There's going to be no electrical supply. There's going to be absolutely nothing. But you will have the land, and you will be able to begin building it from there. And that is how every homestead in just about in the whole history of the United States was started. They were all started by somebody moving on with a wagon or a tent with no fences, no water supply, nothing, and the person having to build it from scratch, putting fences in, putting in a water supply. Those are the two biggies, okay? The water supply and the fences, because nothing else happens without the water. And you can figure out how to do it. But you can
sounds like you're talking about our farm.
With some, you can put a frame up with some corrugated sheets and have the have a gutter running along on this frame type roof, and the water going into an IBC cube, a food grade IBC.
We'll be right back. We're discussing buying a farm, why you should buy a farm, water, a lot of things you should think about as society melts down. Well, we're talking about how do you pay for it? And, you don't have to go to a bank. You really don't. And I can tell you, proof positive, what I did. I decided years ago, back in the 1980s, that I wanted to be financially independent. And now that does not mean wealthy. What that means is that I was determined to be independent of having a job, meaning I could make my own way. And one way you can do that is invest in real estate. But it has to have a return, it has to have cash flow. We have to make cash flow. Well, I found a property that I really liked. And before you jump to conclusions, let me explain this just a little bit. And I'm teaching you right now how you can buy property with very little money. So at this point in my life, I was probably making, $40,000 a year. And I ended up buying $1 million worth of property. Now, how is that possible? Well, you have to be creative. I'm not saying you have to fleece anybody, but you have to be creative. So I was working at the bank, or a bank, and let's say I was making 40, possibly at, maybe 50, 55, 60, something like that. And I decided that I needed to be independent, as I said. So I found this mansion. I'm not kidding. There's a mansion. And I decided it was something that we should buy. Now, it was previously divided into apartments. So this thing, if you looked at it from the front, you'd say, wow. I mean, no kidding. It was impressive. It was a brick mansion. It was huge. It probably is like what Meghan and Harry bought in terms of square footage. Probably pretty close. And it was way less money. But I didn't have that much money. So I looked at it, and I looked at the plumbing, the heating, the electrical, the roof. I looked at the structure. I looked at everything. And I wanted to meet with the owner before submitting a contract. Now, how often is that done? Almost never. Okay. Typically what happens is you work with a realtor, and the realtor says, you want to buy it? Let's put a contract in, and we'll submit it to the owner, and they'll say yes or no, or maybe modify it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to talk to the owner first before handing him a contract. Hardly ever done. And I said, you know what? I'd like to buy this property. We walked around. He told me, the pros, the cons, and all that. And we became, I won't say friends, but, we knew each other, for a half an hour, something like that. And I said, I'd like to buy your property, but I'm going to need to borrow the money from you. That's called OPM. OPM, other people's money. So I had enough for the down payment, but that was it. So I said, I'll put X dollars down, but you'll have to lend me the rest. And we'll schedule this over a 30-year amortization, balloon in 7 years. What do you think? He said, okay. So I bought a property that I absolutely positively could not afford any other way. I didn't have to pay points. I didn't have to pay private mortgage insurance. I didn't have to pay the usury rate that the bank would charge. I got it at a lower interest rate. It was done on a handshake, firmed up with a contract. It was really simple. I had the property very quickly. Now, it had tenants in it and had a couple vacancies. I immediately filled the vacancies. It had a positive cash flow, and I was able to make the payments. It all worked perfectly. And what I just told you about is other people's money. You can buy a farm from a farmer. You can say, I'll tell you what, I like this farm. It's 80 acres, $150,000. Let's see, if I had to borrow the money from a bank, it would be this much. But, Mr. Seller, what would you do with the money? If I paid you in cash, what would you do with the money? Well, a seller would put it in the bank, and they might get almost nothing in return for it. So, okay, well, I'll tell you what, how about if I give you more than that? How about if I pay you 2% or 3% or 4%? And you've got as collateral the farm. If anything goes wrong, you get the farm back. If it goes right, you get your monthly payments. I don't see any reason why it won't go right. Why can't you do that? As a matter of fact, I helped a former friend. He wanted to buy a farm right around here. I introduced him to the seller. The seller really wasn't actively trying to sell the farm. I introduced the buyer, who was my former friend, and the seller. We sat down at a table. We talked about the bank interest rate. If the borrower or the buyer were to borrow money and pay the seller. And so the seller got a little bit higher interest rate than he would have gotten by putting the money in the bank. The buyer paid less in interest. There were no brokerage fees, no plus 6% that the realtors would have gotten. It was done on a handshake, a simple contract, and it worked perfectly. So can you do it? Yeah. I bought a mansion that was cut up into apartments that way. A former friend of mine bought an entire farm that way. No banks were involved. Everybody was happy both times. Gwyneth, any comments about that?
Yeah, I bought my first piece of real estate that way. And it was a 1,720 square metre parcel of land in southeast Queensland that Archie and I found once again on the internet. And we contacted the owner, who was also the seller, who is offering, well, in this country we call it vendor finance. These days you're not supposed to do vendor finance. They have a structure called rent to buy, which amounts to much the same thing. So you pay a certain amount to get onto the land, and then you rent the land for a certain number of years, and then you make a final payment and then the land is yours. Okay? So it amounts to very much the same thing. You know, the legal structure is a bit different, but in practicality, you know, and I bought my very first land together with Archie. That way Archie was still alive at the time, and when he died, I used, he had life insurance, and I used a portion of the life insurance to pay off the land. And the vendor, the seller of that land, is still a friend of mine. And so we talk from time to time on Facebook. And these days, he's made his money, and he devotes most of his time to, you know, exposing corruption in the banking system. Because he says the banks are terrible. They rip people off left, right, and centre, you know. And so he worked for many years doing this sort of vendor contracts where he would buy land off people, and then he would, you know, sell it on to other people who wanted to buy it. And that was how he made his money. And but, you know, it is definitely possible. And you have to be careful. You have to make sure that you make all the payments on time. You have to keep all your receipts, because usually it's written into the contract that if you fall behind in your payments, that the seller can step in and reclaim his land almost immediately. Like within, if you get a month behind on your payments, then usually the seller can step in and get his land back. So you have to make sure that you pay that check every single month, and that you keep every single receipt, and that you're very clear with, you know, with the seller on what's happening. But it definitely is possible, you know. And the other thing I'd like to mention is tools, because people are probably thinking, oh, but to have a farm you need a whole lot of expensive tools, and that's certainly sometimes the case. But it doesn't have to be the case, because here on my farm, I know you've got a lot of expensive tools at your place, Vincent, but here on my farm, I don't have very many expensive tools. Most of my farm work is done with a spade, a rake, a garden fork, a hacksaw, a set of pliers, and what else? A set of secateurs, and a wheelbarrow. And that is about the extent of my farm tools. And all that, if you wanted to, you know, go to, you know, you could pick up those sort of tools second-hand for almost nothing. You know, you don't have to have a whole lot of expensive tools to get started. And you can keep going in your farming ventures for quite a long time with just a spade, you know, a garden fork, a rake, an axe, a saw, a set of pliers, and, you know, a set of secateurs. You can get going and keep going for a very, very long time. Oh, yes, and a piece of stainless steel rod, which I use to twist around the fencing wire to put tension into my fences, which is actually the axle out of an old daybed. So, you know, it's just improvised stuff. And you can do it. Oh, yeah, and a hammer. And, of course, with the fencing wire, with the pair of linesman's pliers comes fencing wire, and with the hammer comes nails. Okay, the hammer is another tool that gets used quite often. But you'll find that you can do an absolutely astonishing amount of work with that simple little toolkit. And that toolkit lives in a cardboard box. Some of the tools, I mean the spade and the rake and the garden fork. The garden fork usually lives in my garden, and the spade and the rake live near the stable, okay? And the wheelbarrow lives near the stable as well, because that's where they're most commonly used. But the thing is all of the other smaller hand tools like the hammer, the saw, the set of pliers and the secateurs and so on and so forth, they literally live on a cardboard box which sits on a table near my back door, which is in the living room. It's not a complicated toolkit. And so I know now that when I finish using my tools, I gather them up, I bring them back down to the house with me, and back they go in the cardboard box that sits on a table near the back door. And then when I go out, I gather them from there. You know, these are not expensive tools. You can pick them up on second hand.
We'll be right back. Just a very quick comment before Robert in Kansas joins us. I just want to say, class, if you decide that you want to call the farmhouse or spend some time with me on the phone, I will not be able to do that today and possibly tomorrow. I'm under a time constraint. I have a deliverable that I must deliver, and so I will not be available if you decide to call or even email. I will not be able to respond to emails. It's not a health thing. It's a deliverable that I have to do, and maybe I can tell you about it in a few days. Welcome, Robert in Kansas.
Hey, good morning, Vincent. Good morning, Guineith. My question was your thoughts on the minimum amount of acreage one would need to be self-sufficient. Obviously, lots of factors, maybe using Missouri, South Central Missouri as a control. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Just the minimum that you would settle for and think that you'd still be okay to operate in a self-sustaining way.
All right. Well, it's good that you qualified that, South Central Missouri, and I can address that. And I have in the past over the years, and the number has not changed. So my number to be somewhat self-sufficient, enough to have a couple cows, a couple other small animals, dogs for security purposes, cats for keeping the mice away, enough room for a garden, enough room to have some woods, let's say 50% woods, so that you have enough fallen limbs and dead trees to cut up for firewood and heat, the farmhouse or the cabin. The answer is 40 acres. That's a quarter of a mile by a quarter of a mile square. That is my minimum. Guineith, now you live in a completely different area. Semi-arid area.
I live in a semi-arid area. Okay, my land is almost all open forest. Okay, so that means that it's forest, but the trees are sort of fairly spread from each other, and they are eucalyptuses. They have a fairly open canopy so that the sunlight can still get to the soil. Okay. So I have the advantage that I have 20 acres of trees, and underneath the 20 acres of trees I have 20 acres of grass or other herbal growth, okay, other sort of plant growth. And so I have 40 acres, but I have 40 acres, I have 20 acres of tree canopy, and then I have 20 acres of grass. And I would regard that as being the absolute minimum. Okay, that you would need. So I would say here, 20 acres, but there's two layers of that 20 acres. There's a 20 acres of trees and sitting on top of 20 acres of grass. So I don't know if that makes sense. I think
it does. It's a very similar number, Guineith, because when I said 40 acres, when I said 40 acres, I said 40 acres, but 20 of it in woods and 20 of it open. And open here means like pasture or fields. So you came up with a very similar number, but a different way, because you're saying that, because of the way the canopy is. Robert, how does that answer your question?
Those are perfect. Those are great answers. Thank you. Vincent, I was curious. You got that property, the 80 acres to your east there. It's about 78 acres of woods, right? It's pretty much just all trees.
That's right. Well, I would say possibly it's all woods except in the very center. So if you were to draw north-south line in the center, and east-west line in the center. Right in the center there's several acres of clearing. So it is absolutely, in my world, magnificent in terms of privacy. But, there's enough room for a garden. There's enough room for a solar array. It'll all work. What a great way to go, for 80 acres. Now, some of it has been logged probably 40 years ago. So it's back. That's nice. It really is. And you could have horses.
I'm sorry. That clearing I'm seeing is like in almost the middle of the property and up on top of a hill. It does look like an amazing place. And, it couldn't be bad having Vincent as your neighbor either,
Well, it depends. It depends. Some people would not want.
Move out there.
Some people would not want me as a neighbor. Not that we are a problem. It's just that they think I'm radical. I'm not radical. I'm normal. They're nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, Vince. You'd have to adopt me, Vince, if I move out there. I'd have to be, take me under your wing.
Well, I would certainly be delighted to do that, Robert. I really would. As a matter of fact, just as a tangent, I was on the phone with Bert in California, and he said, hey, Vin, and I've known Bert for a long time. I mean, 4 decades at least, and 5 really. And he said, hey, Vin, I'd love to send our son out there and have him spend a week with you. And I said, he said he'd probably, sleep well at night. I said he'd pass out. He'd pass out because, he's like a city boy, and he's used to high tech, and he'd be working from morning till dark, and he'd be doing plumbing, heating, electrical, roofing, farming, mechanical. He'd be worn out. And I said it'd be wonderful and be glad to do it. So yeah, I'd be glad to, Robert. So let me know when you're ready. Gwyneth, thank you so much for being with us and staying up late in Australia.